Alright, filming this video in my pajamas. That's plenty of fun. Sorry, I didn't really want to, but today's been tiring. I am tired, and I did not expect that I would be reviewing 4 albums in one weekend. I know I joked that last year was a really slow year for music, but now it's too fast. Guys, slow down. I'm just a boy. Either way, what's up everyone? I'm gonna be doing another multi-album review video. As you can tell, of course, it is 4 albums this time because this is a pretty busy weekend for new music. There's been a lot that I wanted to check out, a lot of artists I was familiar with that I wanted to hear from, so did a lot of listening this weekend. As with the last 3-in-1 album review, this isn't going to be a super detailed look at each album because that's just a whole lot of songs that I have to talk about, but I tried to include at least a good few in here from each album, so I'll just try my best to sum each one up quickly. But as you can see from the title, these are the 4 albums that we are going to be covering today. The new Tomlinson album, Waltz, the new Meghan Trainor album, Treat Myself, the new Kesha album, High Road, and the new Lil Wayne album, Funeral. Originally, I thought I was only going to be reviewing Kesha's new album, but then suddenly Lewis and Meghan popped up on the radar, and then Wayne announced last week that he was releasing Funeral, so I figured I had to talk about that. Once again, talking for a little bit long to get a good thumbnail going for this. Sorry. But yeah, we got a lot to talk about here. 4 albums. I'm gonna try to condense my thoughts as much as I can so I'm not just blabbering on. So let's just get started. First off, I'm going to talk a short bit about the new Lewis Tomlinson album, Waltz. Lewis Tomlinson, for those that don't know, is a former member of One Direction that is finally arriving with his own debut album, and with that, now every former One Direction member finally has a solo album under their belts. But unfortunately, most of my experiences with this album were kind of lackluster. Lewis seems to be going for a somewhat more intimate and personal approach here, which is great, and I do think it's interesting that he's moving into something of an indie rock direction here, with the occasional poppy song here and there. But honestly, I just can't find a whole lot that's really distinct about this album. There are some very emotional themes and lyrics, of course, and Lewis's vocals are nice on several tracks here. I also think he can come through with a really good hook. However, I just don't feel like he's quite carved out his own lane vocally yet. And more than the vocals, I think my big problem here is just how standard a lot of the production feels. Much of this feels like it was very basic, potentially focus grouped, doesn't really stand out a whole lot, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of it was made with the mindset of trying to get it to the radio, because it does sound a bit too radio friendly at some points. It's perfectly listenable, and given that it's just 12 tracks and 39 minutes, it definitely doesn't wear out its welcome. But despite its brevity, it just doesn't spend enough time standing out. Two of Us, thanks to some beautiful emotional vibes, and Always You, thanks to a bouncy poppy instrumental, some catchy vocals, feel like the only real standouts, and then Habit, as a very basic kind of done before country vibing song, feels like possibly the only true lowlight here. Everything else is just kind of fine. If you're a fan of the 1D Boys and you've been waiting patiently for this album, I'm sure you're gonna love it, but for me, it's just decent. You could do worse, but you could also do better. As I said, Two of Us and Always You are probably my favorite tracks. Habit is my least favorite, and on my rating scale, I would say this is gonna get an okay rating. Nothing special, nothing terrible. If you're a 1D fan, you're gonna enjoy it. I just wish it wasn't as safe. Next up, I want to take a look at the new Meghan Trainor album, Treat Myself. Meghan Trainor was one of the bigger pop stars of the late 2010s, even if she wasn't as well received by some music fans and some critics on this website. This is her first album since 2016's Thank You, and while that's a long gap in the pop world, it seemed before going into this that maybe she just wanted to take some time away because maybe she was aware of some of the negative reception that she got and wanted to polish this up to make it the best it could be, possibly let some of the negativity around her fade, and even show some sonic growth on the album. I'm not super familiar with a lot of her older music outside of course, the big singles like All About That Bass and Lips Are Moving, which neither one I was particularly crazy about. So I wasn't sure what to expect going into the album, but it's basically just a 15-track, 46-minute record that really sees Meghan just kind of keeping herself in the comfort zone of those big singles. She's still coming through with a lot of electronic-influenced pop songs that don't sound like they have a ton of sonic growth, and while Meghan is still a good vocalist and shows that pretty consistently, I think that production-wise there's just not that much that's compelling here. Yes, the self-love messages throughout this record are solid, but I just wish those messages were coupled with songs that actually sounded a bit more interesting. Just to give a few examples, Wave is this awkward electronic track that's mostly saved by Mike Sabbath's vocals. Nice to Meet You sounds like the same thing Meghan was creating 4 or 5 years ago, only difference being that it has a decent Nicki Minaj verse. Blink blends a pretty standard poppy beat with what might be one of the album's most annoying choruses. The Pussycat Dolls collaboration Genetics is is a colossal disappointment that, despite some great vocal energy, is bogged down by overdone, repetitive instrumentals and a chorus that is only memorable for really bad reasons. And then there's another opinion, which, beyond the grating chorus of that song, if Meghan's trying to show that she doesn't care about someone else, be it a hater or an ex or what have you, a song like this feels like it goes against its intended purpose because it makes her look like she cares a little bit too much. Now, there are definitely high points on the album, like the very heavenly, beautiful anthem that is Babygirl, the light but still breezy and rather emphatic banger Lie to Me, the somewhat plucky, lovely showcase of Meghan's vocal talents that is Here to Stay, and then the raw, vocally gorgeous, and honestly stunning AJ Mitchell collaboration After You. But for me, I find that Meghan is largely at her best when she goes for these more emotional tracks, as opposed to rehashing sounds and styles that we've heard from her way too many times in the past few years. Meghan is, in my eyes, a talented artist. I know some people won't say that, but I will say that she is talented. And I love the messages that she's going for here, but while they're very strong and while there are plenty of emotional standouts on the album, much of these sonic elements here feel too stuck in the past to the point where it feels like Meghan is trying to recapture her old sound or strike lightning in a bottle twice to diminishing effect. It's not unlistenable. And again, lyrically, I think there are things here that are pretty good. But unfortunately, I just wish Meghan didn't spend so much time repeating old sounds. I think that's what's bringing her down, and that's what's probably going to stop her from making a really great album. Again, my favorite tracks were Babygirl, Lie to Me, Here to Stay, and After You. Least favorites were Wave, Nice to Meet You, Blink, Genetics, and Another Option. And on my rating scale, I would say that Meghan Trainor's Treat Myself is going to get a bad rating from me. I don't think it's terrible. I do think there are standouts here, but I feel like Meghan has a ways to go until she makes a great album. I think there needs to be some sonic growth whenever she comes out with her next project. Moving right along, now we get to talk about the new Kesha album, High Road. Kesha, I've talked about her several times in my reviews, so I don't really need to introduce her. She is back with her 4th studio album and her first since 2017's Rainbow. I reviewed that album back in 2017 on my blog, and I recently started my 10 Years Later series by talking about Kesha's Animal. Both of those links are in the description if you want to go check out my thoughts on them. But while I'm not a gigantic Kesha fan, I have enjoyed a lot of what I've heard from her, so I was pretty interested going into this album. It is a bit long at 16 tracks and 52 minutes, but having enjoyed the somewhat more raw direction of Rainbow, I was interested to see if Kesha would keep going in that direction on this album. What I found is that a good deal of this feels like Kesha trying to bring back some of the ideas of her popular 2010s music while maintaining some of the lighter sounds of Rainbow, making it kind of a best of both worlds. At first, I thought this was going to be a better for worse approach because I wasn't crazy about the opener Tonight, which felt a little more annoying than exciting and didn't have a great hook. But then I quite liked the plucky, fun, sassy, attitude-filled track My Own Dance, and then from there I just found consistent highlights on this album. High Road is a track that combines Kesha's old sound with some new emphasis on her beautiful vocals. Shadow, while it does sound like a Rainbow 2.0, is another beautiful and poignant emotional track that still features plenty of Kesha's trademark attitude. Honey is a light-hearted, fantastic acoustic banger that mixes snark and Kesha's personality with some very memorable vocal harmonies. Cowboy Blues, while featuring some rather humorous lyrics, is actually a beautiful sounding acoustic track that stands tall as one of the album's best. Little Bit of Love has some of the most colorful production here. I really love the staccato piano melody on the beginning of the song. Birthday Suit is an intoxicating banger with some fantastic 8-bit production that Kesha plays off pretty much perfectly. And Father-Daughter Dance is a stunner of a song as Kesha gets very personal and talks about how she didn't really know her dad in what is another beautiful moment on the album. There are some lowlights here like the aforementioned Tonight and the Potato song Cause I Want To, which is another track that honestly feels a bit more annoying than funny. Again, I kind of compared a little bit to Dinosaur off of Kesha's first album Animal, but those lowlights are so few and far between for me that this record just feels very consistent in spite of its pretty long length. The features were pretty good as well too. I was hoping for a little bit more out of Big Frida's appearance on Raising Hell, but I do love the multitude of guests Stargirl, Simpson, Brian Wilson, and Rabble on the beautiful minimal Resentment, one of the best songs here by far. Kesha brings back her old persona, the Kesha with a $ for the S, on Kinky, a glossy electro-pop track that has a serious earworm of a hook that's just too fun to ignore. And Rabble shows up again on BFF, another glossy electro-pop song that invokes feelings of nostalgia and works on the chemistry of its two artists. All in all, I might be in the minority here, but I honestly really loved this album. I love how Kesha mixed the old ideas and attitude of something like Animal with the light emotional feel of Rainbow, and I think she comes through with a consistent, fantastic, pretty beautiful album here. I might be in the minority, but I really love this. I think Kesha did an amazing job with it, and it is definitely worth listening to. Again, my favorite tracks will be My Own Dance, High Road, Shadow, Honey, Cowboy Blues, Resentment, Little Bit of Love, Birthday Suit, Kinky, BFF, and Father-Daughter Dance. My least favorites would be Tonight and the piano song because I want to, but overall, those few lowlights aren't going to stop me from giving Kesha's High Road an excellent rating. I really enjoyed this album, and I definitely suggest you give it a look. If you're a Kesha fan, you're going to love it. If you're not, you might still find a few tracks in here that you're going to like, but definitely give it a listen. And lastly, it's time to talk about the new Lil Wayne album, Funeral. This is the 13th studio album from the well-known, highly popular rap titan Lil Wayne, who I just talked about on this channel in my 10 Years Later retrospective on his really rough album Rebirth. Given the title of this, I kind of worried that it would be a sequel to that, but fortunately it's not, so I think we dodged a bullet. But either way, Wayne's an artist I've recently come around to quite a bit, thanks in no small part to the Carter 5, his 2018 album that was delayed a lot of people were talking about it, it was very hyped up, and it was an album that I really enjoyed when it came out. So with that in mind, with the fact that I've started to appreciate Wayne's music a bit more, I was kind of interested going into Funeral and hearing about Funeral, until I found out it was going to be a 24-track album that was well over an hour. I gave Wayne a pass on the long album thing with the Carter 5, because he had been working on that for 4 to 5 years. He probably wanted to keep his fans happy by giving them a lot of stuff. There was probably even more that was left on the cutting room floor that didn't make the album, but pretty much everything here seems to be new material that's been created since the Carter 5's release, so I worried that it was going to feel overstuffed and not up to the standard of that album, let alone some of Wayne's classics, the Carter 2, the Carter 3, stuff like that. And I can tell you, this is far removed from that album. There are minimal highs and giant lows, and Wayne crafts what might be one of the most repetitive hip-hop albums I've heard in a long time. On the good end, Funeral is an emotional start to the album with some really strong, fast-paced flows. Mahogany succeeds thanks to the simple but colorful beat and Wayne going pretty hard on it. I like the spacey beat and vibes on the track Stop Playing With Me, and Not Me has a really hard beat that Wayne rides pretty well, I would say. Unfortunately, that's about as good as the album gets. There are plenty of low points on this thing. Mamma Mia has hard flows but a repetitive, boring beat that doesn't do much that's distinct outside of the somewhat creepy vibe and that kind of gross breastfeeding lyric. Clap For 'Em is a disappointment in that it's got a colorful beat that makes it feel like a twerk anthem, but it's a song that gets more annoying as it goes on. Tracks like Wild Dogs and Dark Side feel really repetitive against many of the other songs here, and Bastard Satan's Kid has even more annoying flows and hooks from Wayne. I think a lot of the choruses on this thing and a lot of the flows on this thing just really stale out. Not made much better by the fact that a lot of the trap-driven production here is very samey, very standard, very safe. Nothing really all that special or really memorable about it at all. This thing also has some pretty big features, but once again, in terms of things not standing out, many of the features don't stand out, and if they do, it's for pretty bad reasons. Big Sean and Lil Baby pop up on I Do It, the former of whom has a pretty boring hook and the latter of whom has a verse that feels pretty repetitive and doesn't stand out like Wayne's does. J-Rock comes in on Bing James and has a solid performance, but the dark beat just gets boring after a while and the chorus is one of the most annoying ones on the album. Adam Levine of Maroon 5, surprisingly, shows up on this album for some reason on the track Trust Nobody, and his chorus is about as boring and monotone as you would expect. 2 Chainz comes in on Know You Know and does the best that he can to break up the monotony over what's a really lackluster beat, but Wayne's vocal riffing is pretty boring here, definitely taking the track down a peg. Takeoff's appearance on I Don't Sleep is probably the only thing that's really exciting about the song. The Dream heads in on Sights and Silencers and sounds nice, but the track just burns too slow for its own good. And Lil Twist comes in to help make Ball Hard one of the few genuinely solid bangers on the album, even if a few of the flows can be repetitive. Oh, and speaking of features, can I ask something? What is Wayne's obsession with posthumous XXXTentacion collaborations? Like, it was cool and all with Don't Cry on the Carter 5, and that track still hits and still feels pretty good, but Wayne mentioned that he didn't know who X was before his death, and on this album, Get Out of My Head is the 4th posthumous X and Wayne collaboration song, a very underwhelming one at that. So at this point, combining that with the fact that he didn't know who X was before his death makes me wonder if Wayne's just exploiting X now. Oh, and for some reason, OT Genesis, the guy who made that that song Coco, shows up on Tio, and his verse is kind of decent, even though I feel like some of his flows stale out a little bit quickly. But overall, as much as I wanted to enjoy this album, it's just such a slog. I'd like to think shortening it down would have fixed things, and maybe it would have helped, but it's not like a lot of the material here really stands out. Just comparing to some of the songs that were on the Carter 5, there's not really many uproars, there's not a Mona Lisa, there's not a Don't Cry here. Most of the tracks are just meh. The Carter 5 was a long record, but at least I got an idea of why Wayne is considered to be so influential on that album. With this though, no. It just feels like Wayne delivering run-of-the-mill flows over forgettable trap beats, jumping really hard on the bandwagon of trap rap, without much in the way of interesting lyricism or storytelling, and it feels like Wayne's just fucking around for way too long. I know it's only February technically, but I would honestly say that we might be looking at one of the year's most disappointing albums. In terms of favorite tracks, Funeral, Mahogany, Stop Playing With Me, Not Me, and Ball Hard. And then in terms of least favorites, Mamma Mia, Clap For 'Em, Trust Nobody, Know You Know, Wild Dogs, Bastard Satan's Kid, Get Out of My Head, and Dark Side. All in all, I don't want to give the album this rating, but unfortunately here we are. Lil Wayne's Funeral is gonna get an awful rating from me. This was really disappointing. It really could have been shortened a lot, and I don't know. As much as I loved the Carter 5 more than probably most people did, this one I get the impression I am going to dislike more than most people. You win some, you lose some, I guess. So I'm gonna leave it at that. That was a lot to review for one weekend, but hey, I tried. And again, sorry if I wasn't more specific on some of these, but again, that's just a lot of music, so I tried to condense my thoughts as best as I could. Either way, which of these albums have you listened to? How many of them are you going to listen to? What are your thoughts on them? Which ones did you love, hate? Which ones were you indifferent towards? So let me know all your thoughts down in the comments. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe, thanks, but if not, I'm not gonna beg you for it. It's totally okay. As for what's next, I think next week is Green Day's new album, and I will definitely be giving that a listen and reviewing it for you guys, so stay tuned. But until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.